Okay guys, today we're going to be talking about value, light and shadow, specifically how it falls across the form of a sphere or other spherical shapes. So real quick, this is a little breakdown of the different components of light as it hits a sphere. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to show how that actually would happen on a spherical object. This is something I had handy, a lemon. Couldn't find a perfect sphere for you guys. I'm going to turn the light off real fast, so we're only working with one directional light coming from the side, same as this diagram. If you look at this lemon, we can kind of break down the way the light falls across this form. For example, I can see a highlight, the shiniest, brightest part right here. So that would be our highlight in our drawing here, that's right in here. Highlight, general light tone would be right here. As I move closer to the deep shadow, we're getting into a general shadow tone through here. As we move way into the deep dark shadow, you'll see the darkest part of the shadow, which is the shadow's core, or core of the shadow. Then at the very edge back here, you'll see some reflected light, and that's where light is coming in this direction, hitting a lighter object and bouncing back. And that's that sliver you see here. And then the last component will be the cast shadow, which in our case is right here, very easy to see. So you can actually break that down when you have one good directional light source. Now keep in mind that falls apart a bit when things are washed out. Like when you're under fluorescent lights, or in this case, we have two light sources, one from this side and one from that side. So keep that in mind. So hopefully that little visual demonstration helps. I've broken it down here for how light would fall across the form of the sphere in the same way. So you're always going to have highlight, general light, shadow, core of the shadow, reflected light, and the cast shadow. That's something that's just going to be consistent no matter what. In all of my drawings here today, I'm doing light coming from a downward angle this way, just for the sake of consistency. So I already, for the sake of time, have these drawn out for us. I have one in graphite pencils, one in charcoal pencils, and I'm going to build those up hopefully kind of simultaneously. Just so you know the tools I'm working with today, I've got, I'm going to use 3 graphite pencils and 3 charcoal pencils to make it easier, a kneaded eraser, maybe a chamois cloth, just a little bit, a blending cloth. As you can see, mine's been used a little bit, got some charcoal on it, but just when it comes to the charcoal. I wrote this down so you have an idea of the pencils that I chose. 2H for the lights, HB for the mids, 3B for the dark, a hard and a medium and soft of some sort in your charcoal pencils that may equate to like 2B, 4, and 6B, depending on your brands and how they're broken down. So depending on the lighting in any sphere that you have in like a still life on the table, the way the shadows break down are going to be a little bit different. I'm doing this kind of from the way that I know lighting on a sphere should work in my head, because I've done this a lot of times before. But you'll be able to see that, just like with our lemon early on, how the shadow is going to break down. Now, in general, what I always say is the shapes of shadows as they move across a sphere are going to be a little bit like a crescent moon type shape, very much like if you were drawing an equator across a globe. So that means that none of the shadows should break at a hard edge, like an angle. That's going to flatten our shape. We have to think about these as curving lines across the roundedness of the form. So I've already kind of broken down very lightly where I want my highlight to be, where I'm thinking my light will break to shadow and then get into the deepest shadows core. I've just got a couple little lines blocked out for myself already. So I did that with a pretty light pencil. Now, what I'm going to think about doing first and foremost is, well, one, I want to start with really sharp pencil tips, for sure. That's really key. Some people will even go so far as to hand sharpen their pencils like I've done here with a knife, so you get a longer lead. Now, the reason we do that is when the technique I'm going to use for shading today, there's a couple different techniques we could do. So one, you can hold your pencil at a more extreme angle like this on the page, across the surface of the page. Imagine this is the top of the paper here. And you can make more linear strokes. So that would end up looking something like this. And we call that like cross hatching. So you would make a lot of small strokes, chop, 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 layer upon layer to slowly build up value. That is a valid way to shade, but it's very time consuming, very time consuming. So what I'm going to do instead of angling my pencil like this and drawing lines, I'm going to angle my pencil super shallowly, if that's a word, almost to where the whole end of my lead, that's why it's so important that this is sharp, is grazing across the paper like this. So when I do that, the difference is going to look something like this. As I move back and forth across the page, if I can train my hand to be pretty steady, check out how smooth that blend is and how much material I'm grazing across the paper kind of quickly. So it's just a method to work in graphite a little bit faster than the crosshatch method, which can be super, super slow and tedious. I'm starting with the HP, which is kind of in the middle of the road as far as darkness. And what I'm going to do is, where I've broken down my deep shadow line, where the light really starts to break across the form of the sphere from light to shadow, I'm going to lay in a light pressure. I'm not pushing super, super hard on this HP pencil. You'll notice that the tooth of the paper is really coming through. You'll see a lot of texture from the page, and that's okay. But I'm getting that first crescent moon shape, and I'm blocking this in what I would call kind of a very light to medium darkness. Eventually this is going to be fairly boldly dark, but for now I'm keeping a light pressure. I don't want to go too dark too fast just yet. But as you can see, it's blocking in the beginning of that shadow. So that would be step number one in a very kind of light way. And notice I'm trying to, you can't really see the direction that my pencil was going in too much. That's the goal for me. Let the pencil do the work. Don't elbow grease it in there and muscle it in too harshly. So again, that was the HB pencil. The cast shadow is going to be one of the darkest tones in this whole image. So I'm going to go to the 3B. And again, I'm using a fairly light pressure. Don't go crazy with it or overboard too soon in this drawing. Now I am going to kind of edge around the shape of my circle here just so that I can really see a clear difference between the shadow of the circle. I shouldn't call it a circle, the sphere. But the shadow in the sphere versus the shadow on the floor. I want to make sure that the shadow on the floor or tabletop is quite a bit darker. And you can see that that's starting to happen. You can see a clear distinction between middle grays and slightly darker grays. Still using the wide side of this pencil. And you can really vary the pressure to get different results. So even though this is a 3B pencil and should be very, very dark, I'm using it in kind of a light touch. So a lot of variety with the type of mark that I can get. So already we have light, we have shadow, we have cast shadow, which is good. Now I'm going to try to break that up a little bit further even. So the next step is the only thing that should be white in my whole drawing is going to be the highlight, the brightest bright, which I've very lightly circled out right here. If you go really dark, if you draw a circle like this for where your highlight should be, it would always be visible in the drawing, and that's why it's so light in mine. So now I'm going for the 2H pencil, so the lighter of all of the pencils that I have in my toolbox today. Using the wide side of that pencil. Going to clean up some of those construction lines just so they're not too visibly present in my final drawing. Okay. And if you'll notice, I'm mostly going in a diagonal, call it a brush stroke, but the stroke of the pencil, the direction that I'm shading in, that's out of laziness right now. That's just where my hand naturally wants to go because I'm right-handed. But again, try not to get too many linear lines in here. Really using the broad side of this pencil and as even of a touch as I can on the pencil. All right, so now we're getting just even a little bit more cleaned up. We've got highlight, we've got light, we've got the deep shadow and the core shadow, or the cast shadow down here. So that's a good start. That's a great start because 80%, 90% of this has already been filled in some capacity. It's still pretty flat, but it's gonna come along quicker because I'm breaking it down into big, simple shapes, which is awesome. So that's the graphite side. I'm gonna jump over to charcoal next and do the same exact thing with the charcoal. Now this is gonna be a little bit dicier because charcoal is such a dark medium and a rough medium to control sometimes for some people, especially if you're used to, like, I know for my drawing one classes, you've been really used to working in graphite heavy or graphite pens, colored pencils, things like that early in the semester. So same exact method of shading. I'm just working up here to kind of make sure that my charcoal has a smooth edge to it. That's really important, that I can get a pretty clear and clean kind of a blend. I'm going to do that with all three versions just to make sure I'm not surprised by anything. It's important to have a really smooth edge to this charcoal, not any bumps that are going to be kind of like wild cards for us later on. All right, so I'm grabbing my 2B charcoal pencil, which really it would be more of a middle of the road charcoal. This one would probably be the equivalent of a medium, even to a soft in other brands. Just so happens that this brand is a little on the soft side, so I would call this my medium, probably. If you're using those orange General's pencils, I would say this is the equivalent of a medium or even a soft, to be honest. Okay, so blocking in my deeper shadow first, just like I did here. You'll notice it's a little bit darker, but that's okay. I'm gonna have to work a little harder to build up these darker values on my graphite. I should also note that there could be a bit of glare on the graphite in this video, and we'll find out soon. But graphite tends to be a little shiny, so we'll watch out and see if there happens to be a whole lot of glare. All right. I'll try to follow the same format as I had before. I'm now going for my softer pencil. Using the wide side, filling out a bit of the cast shadow. Now, if you'll notice, I'm trying to be kind of washy on the edge of the shadow. I'm not trying to make a really harsh edge. Really, I'm not trying to make a harsh edge too much of anywhere just yet, actually. And now my highlight is right in the middle. I'm gonna give myself a little bit of a wide berth just to make sure I don't go darker than I would like to, close to that highlight. And I'm now using the wide side of the hard pencil. This is a General's brand hard pencil. Sometimes they don't work so well, to be honest, because this is a bit of a cheaper brand of charcoal, but it's actually really nice to have at least one charcoal pencil that's a little bit on the harder side, because those soft ones, my other brand, just so you guys know, is Stettler. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that totally right. It's a good company. They make good graphite pencils. They seem to make good charcoal pencils. But it's a much softer charcoal, which means it's going to go a lot darker, a lot faster than some of these cheapies that I'm used to. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to cheat just a little bit, especially in this light area, and I'm going to use a little bit of my chamois to blend with. Why I say it's cheating is that I like to give students a bit of a challenge to do a lot of the rendering just with the pencil and get the appearance of a smooth render. It is a little bit easier to get something like a smooth quality if you use some sort of a blending tool. I'm not a huge fan of the kind of rolled paper blending stumps, to be honest. Just never have been. I find that drawing students often get too much of an airbrushed look when they try to rely too heavily on the blending stump. It almost becomes like a crutch. But I will say that something like a chamois cloth can really get a smoother blend. It kind of gets rid of some of that texture that you see on my drawing right now. Now, I will also say that a chamois cloth can act like a vacuum. So I was using the light side of the chamois that hadn't been used before, and it actually sucks up a lot of the charcoal. So what I'm going to do is lay a bit of a base down here, scrub a bit of this charcoal in, hopefully get a little bit of a smoother blend up here in the top, just in this light area where it's so finicky with a charcoal pencil to achieve a softness. All right, and that's some of that kind of airbrush soft blend that would have been really hard to get just with the pencils alone. Not impossible, but it might have taken a little more time than I have in this video today. What I like about charcoal is, if you notice, I'm gonna erase out a little bit of highlight right here, and it's really forgiving when you work lightly like I am right now. And you can erase back to the white of the paper if you're lucky. It may be a little hard to see in this video, but soon as I build these darks up a little bit darker, I think you'll be able to see that. So that is a great step one of the process for us. And we'll get into a little bit more in-depth shading in just a minute.